Hi, and welcome to The Picture Show, filmed live in the studios of Bossier Parish Community College. I'm Cody, and today we're talking about movies about Días los Muertos. So with me today, I have
Shelby.
and Shelby and I are going to be talking about all the Day of the Dead films. So first up on our list is going to be The Book of Life. Let's take a look at that.
I will never stop loving you.
Did you think it was gonna be that easy?
I kinda did.
She's not your average princess.
Did I mention I studied fencing?
You picked yourself a feisty one.
They're not your typical Prince Charming.
You two are acting like fools.
Wait, me too?
And this
I'll do anything to be with Maria.
Are you certain?
With all my heart.
Done?
is not your ordinary fairy tale.
Where am I?
Welcome to the land of the remembered. Just hold.
This year,
Please help me reunite with the love of my life.
Stay here with us.
We have epic fiestas every day.
All you can eat churros.
comes an adventure
You're so strong, Joaquin.
Thanks. I work out a lot.
unlike anything you've ever seen.
Why don't you pick on someone your own size?
Cause no one's that big, man.
Hey, buddy. Yes.
The Book of Life.
Hold it! I know exactly what to play. You got what I need.
Seriously?
So that was The Book of Life. Now, Book of Life is based around Días los Muertos, which is the Day of the Dead. So, Shelby, tell us a little bit about Day of the Dead.
The Day of the Dead is a very old Hispanic tradition. It's about 3,000 years old. It started in the Aztec tradition, and then 3,000 years later, the mostly central Mexico was celebrating it, and it wasn't until about the 16th century that all of Hispanic heritage, Mexico and South America, were celebrating it. So it definitely has some it's very based around obviously death, but mostly the afterlife. And it's kind of really close to All Saints' Day of Catholicism, where you see people essentially honor their dead relatives with food and prayers for the afterlife. So there's a lot of attributes there that also go with the Christian faith. So it's very interesting.
So that's definitely what these two films touch on. First, we're going to be talking about The Book of Life, of course. And Book of Life was directed by Jorge R. I'm going to mess up this last name.
Don't say it wrong.
Gutierrez. I'm probably mispronouncing that. But he's worked on other films. He was a screenwriter on El Tigre and El Mono and stuff like that.
He's very proud of his Hispanic heritage.
And then they had the producer on the film was actually Del Toro.
Yes.
And so he definitely had a lot of input on this film. And I really enjoy this movie. I think I saw this film 3 times in theaters. And the music in this is great. And the music for the film, they use a lot of already made, like, American music, and they make a kind of Mexican twist on it.
Very mariachi Hispanic twist to it, and it works out great for this movie. And I guess just like not personally having that Hispanic heritage background, this movie lays it out really in an interesting way, different than the movie we're going to see later in the show. But and we actually bought Book of Life, and we watched the features at the end. And I believe it's the director's wife that did a lot of the animation with him, and they've laid out, they kind of already knew exactly what they wanted to do. While they wanted to talk about Hispanic heritage, they also wanted to bring in that very multicultural, maybe even just American music. I say that Mumford and Sons is in there, and so it was definitely like a collaboration of both worlds, and which was really neat.
And then they had some pretty great actors in there. I mean, Manolo was played by Diego Luna, who we see in Rogue One. They got Zoe Saldana as Maria, and Joaquin is played by the hilarious Channing Tatum, who I've just grown to love his comedy, and he's great in this. He's actually one of my favorite characters in this movie because he's just ridiculous the entire time.
Yeah, he plays the hero very well. And if you haven't seen it, it's essentially a story about these two boys that grow up together. And I forget the spirits' names, but they kind of watch over them. They rule over the land of the living and the land of the dead. And they essentially have a wager that they can get the other one to marry the young girl when they're all grown. And Maria is sent off to a finishing school, essentially, and they come back and they're trying to win their heart. Obviously, there's a lot of, Day of the Dead aspects that go on in there with the spirits and Manolo dying, and you get to see the insane world of the undead.
Yeah, and this film, they touch on like the bullfighting aspect of a lot of stuff, and then about the military, or at least the hero aspect, and how medals are a big deal, and all that. And the movie kind of takes place early 1900s, I'd say, while it's also being told to like these children at a museum throughout the film. So you kind of get like this neat little effect where they use like little wooden figures, and then it's just floating skeletons almost whenever they go to the undead part, or the land of the dead. And so I really like the animation in this because it all makes sense, and then it goes back to like a little bit more realistic or cartoony human whenever they show the children who are hearing the story from the Book of Life.
Yeah, the wooden figures is definitely anything that I don't think I've seen before. So the animation was, as far as I know, pretty original. I don't know, that anything else this director has done.
Well, it pulls a lot from El Tigre.
Okay.
Fans of El Tigre definitely notice the similar animation because the director, he was a writer on a lot of the films, and I believe his wife even was one of the artists on El Tigre. So they definitely got to bring some of that in. So
it's definitely, now both movies are children's movies, but this definitely is more of a children's movie, I would say, than Coco. And we'll talk about that later.
This movie does have some adult jokes in it, though, and it's some amazing references. Like, my favorite moment in there is Joaquin has a moment where he jumps into the sky and he does this pose, and it's straight up from The Dark Knight Returns. And I point it out every single time I see it, just because I think it's great what they do, and all the little songs they do throwbacks to you would never think of. I think one of my favorite moments in there is they do Creep. Manolo does it, just playing it alone in the arena.
I do love how, especially in this movie, how you see, while there's a lot of colors in the living world, there's even so much more, essentially making this afterlife world like 10 times better, whether it's, food or colors. It's essentially like a nightlife. This is what happens when you die type thing. And so I thought that was really neat, that especially since it is Hispanic heritage, that is essentially what they think, is that the afterlife is going to be, this crazy, awesome reunion with your family and essentially partying. And I think that's a really neat way to look at it.
The land of the remembered. And there's also the land of the forgotten, of those who no longer have anyone out there, and that's where they spend their last moments until they fade away. So, and I enjoyed the artwork on both parts. And then you even have the candle maker, who's done by Ice Cube, which is always weird hearing Ice Cube do.
And a children's anything.
Yeah, which that's what he's mainly done now. But it's great every time he does it.
And then I did want to point out, especially with the Day of the Dead, that is something that they do, obviously, is the family makes this altar, and it's called an ofrenda, and they put their pictures up, they put food for the afterlife, as well as they visit their graves, and you see that they kind of make a path to their house where the dead can come home and visit them. And this movie is really neat, and it's centered around the whole idea, of if you're forgotten by the living, then you're forgotten, in the afterlife. Yeah.
And we'll touch on our next movie here in just a moment, but let's take a look at what's new on Netflix and DVD.
Good afternoon, moviegoers. I'm Adam Stampley with this week's Netflix and DVD picks. First up on Netflix this week, we have Good Will Hunting, starring Matt Damon and Robin Williams. When a janitor at MIT discovers he has a gift in mathematics, a psychologist helps him find a new direction in life. Next up, we have Children of Men, starring Clive Owen and Julianne Moore. In 2027, in a chaotic world where women can no longer bear children, a former activist agrees to transport a pregnant woman to a sanctuary at sea. Now, I know Halloween is over, but the next movie on Netflix is one of my favorites of all time, Bram Stoker's Dracula, starring Keanu Reeves and Gary Oldman. The centuries-old Count Dracula travels to England to seduce his lawyer's wife and inflict havoc on the region. Coming out on DVD on the 6th this month, we have We the Animals, starring Sheila Vann and Raul Castillo. As three kids grind through their rough childhood, two of them grow up to be like their father when one embraces a world he imagines up on his own. Next up, we have The Incredibles 2, starring Craig T. Nelson and Holly Hunter. Mr. Incredible is left to care for the kids as Elastigirl is out saving the world. Next up, we have Black Klansman, starring Charlie Wichell and Topher Grace. A black Colorado Springs officer successfully manages to infiltrate the local KKK branch with the help of a Jewish surrogate. That's all we have for you this week. I'm Adam Stampley. Let's get back to the picture show.
And welcome back. We're talking about Diez Los Muertos films. So a while ago, we just talked about Book of Life. Next up on our list is going to be Coco. Let's take a look at that trailer.
Once every year, our ancestors come back to our world.
Please have a safe journey.
To see family and friends. But no living person has ever visited their world. Until now.
All right, who's in there?
I'm sorry. What's going on? Dante, wait up! You gotta stay with me, boy. We don't know where we are. I'm just dreaming.
Do you mind?
Miguel? What is going on?
Remind me how I know you?
They're your family. We have to get you back home.
Welcome. Anything to declare?
As a matter of fact, yes.
And so that was Coco. And the film stars... film stars Anthony Gonzalez as Miguel, as the main character who's obsessed with this artist, and he's become a musician, but his family doesn't like music. So he hides away and finds out that his grandfather may actually be the artist. So we get to see his journey as he goes into the Day of the Dead, the Land of the Dead, or Land of the Remembered, and meet his family as he's unable to get back. The film is directed by Lee Unkrich and Adrian Molina. And I know Lee Unkrich, he also directed films like Toy Story 3, Monsters Incorporated, and
Inside Out, I believe.
I'm not sure about Inside Out.
They made it.
Yeah. But this is a Pixar film, so it definitely has that same feel. The animation in this is on point, where they have a lot of little details that you don't see in a lot of other films, because Pixar has that kind of money that they can do that.
Yeah, this was a great film, especially as far as animation goes. Very different from Book of Life, and again, the colors of representing the Day of the Dead are just amazing. And like you said, the details in here, each scene is just, it's like you're there. Mm-hmm. And I love Miguel's character, and the movie title is about his great or just
his great-grandmother.
Just great-grandmother, just one great. And so it's essentially it starts out the history of her family and how her father left, and how that's kind of why no one associates with music, because he was a musician. And then obviously you find out later, what happened with him. But tons of music in this movie too, but as far as I know, it's all original. No covers. But it's a great soundtrack just to listen to.
Yeah, in this, they'll play one song and then they'll show you a different version of that same song as a different artist, has a different meaning to it. A lot of the voice actors in this are actually Latino, whereas some of the others were not.
Channing Tatum isn't Latino.
Yeah, but we'll touch on that here in a bit. But in this film, the artwork in this is great. The soundtrack in this is amazing. The directing style, I guess, is just very similar to that of a Pixar film. It's very straightforward. It's not a Pixar film unless you're crying at some point. That's really how they make their films.
Yeah, and another thing I do like about this movie, and I can't really remember that, I don't think it was in Book of Life, but the spirit animals. And honestly, I didn't know that was even, a thing in the Day of the Dead history, but it was very interesting to see that. It's very, very informative on the Day of the Dead in Mexican history. Again, it felt like I was there the entire time. And what was your favorite part about this movie?
Well, for Coco, I definitely have to say it'd be the moment. There's a big twist in there, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it's that moment in the film that I'm just like...
It's a good twist.
Yeah. Like, I really enjoy what they did. You kind of see it coming the entire time, but at the same time, they do it very well. Because at the end of the day, it's just a matter of how you do it. It's not, even though someone else has done it before, how well can you put it off? And they do it very well in this.
Yeah, this movie was definitely original all the way through. And it just gave you a really good idea of, that Hispanic heritage. Again, like the ofrendas in the land of the remembered, the land of the forgotten. Again, the whole time he personally is trying to get back home, and his ancestors won't give him a blessing that allows him to play, music, and that's his entire life. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of this is kind of like a follow your dreams aspect, no matter what anybody says. But at the end, there's obviously a reconciliation with his family, and so everything turns out right.
Yeah. And so we'll actually compare the two films here in just a moment. But first, let's take a look at the Friday Flick Pick.
Good afternoon and welcome to this week's Friday Flick Pick. I'm Sarah Patterson. We leave the month of October and bring more of the same to the first week of November. It only took 17 days for director Chris von Hoffman, cast and crew, to wrap on the horror thriller Monster Party. This offbeat mystery circles around three teenage thieves who infiltrate a mansion dinner party as a catering crew. When the heist goes bottoms up, they discover the hosts and guests are more than the social elite. Let's take a look at the trailer.
Yep.
We should definitely have something big tomorrow.
Working that dinner party thing tomorrow night, I told you this.
They got a safe in the master bedroom. Yuppie scums won't know where them.
My name is Roxanne Dawson, and like all of you, I'm an addict.
Hello, Roxanne.
It's been a long and arduous battle for me. With monsters, inside and out. But here I am, a functioning member of society.
We gotta get out of here. Those kids aren't leaving this house alive.
Tonight was supposed to be a reunion to celebrate everyone's cleanliness, but
You've been a bad boy.
this can't be happening. We're not animals,
Aren't we? I love this thing. I'm ready to make the Dawsons great again.
That's going to do it for this week's Friday Flick Pick. I'm Sarah Patterson, and we'll see you at the theater.
So that was the Friday Flick Pick. So let's compare the two films. So we have Coco and The Book of Life. So out of the two, which would you prefer? Like, what would you say your favorite movie out of the two?
Definitely Coco, just all around animation, music, and story.
All right. Now, of the two films, Book of Life is definitely going to be my favorite. It's the movie that I know we bought it right after it came out. Went and saw it in theater several times. Coco, I never saw that in theaters. I waited till it was out on DVD and then went and watched it, and I enjoyed it. It's very much a straightforward film. So a lot of the Pixar movies are kind of that way, and so I was fine with just waiting on it.
Yeah. Well, again, like one reason why Coco is my favorite is the music. Comparatively to Book of Life, it has its own original soundtrack, but Book of Life did an excellent job of making their covers of Hispanic, of kind of the mariachi style, and it was just good. I enjoyed the originality, I guess, a little bit more than the covers of the music.
Yeah. Now on the films, the two had very different budgets. Book of Life only had 50,000, or not 50,000, 50 million. 50,000 is actually a cheap film. 50 million to work on their film, and in the end, they end up coming out with 51 million at the box office at the end of the day.
Barely
Yeah,
making.
but I mean, they still made a little bit of money back.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
I think there's definitely a lot more personal aspect to Book of Life, especially the director and his family being Hispanic. So I'm sure that came out well in the end. Pixar's a really big company.
Yeah, one of the directors, I believe, were not Hispanic on Coco, but they had 175 million on theirs, and it came out to be, what was it, about 210 million on their budget, or not their budget, on their money they got back. So they still made quite a bit of money. I think this was one of the lower end Pixar films for them.
Really?
Yeah, because they didn't have as big of a thing about it, and then they kind of suffered from the fact that Book of Life came out the year before.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
And Pixar's had the same issue before, or Disney has, where the film Rio came out just before that they released. They were working on a film about two blue geckos, and you see teases of that in Toy Story 3 and some other films. And so this may have suffered from that a little bit, because I mean, they still made a lot of money, but at the end of the day, they only made 25 million off of it.
Right. So from a financial aspect, one was a little bit more successful, but yeah, the animation in these though, I would say you can tell obviously the budget, but at the same time, how Book of Life did their animation, especially with the wooden kind of dolls, that worked out for them. It was different, and I don't know what those puppets are called, but the little wooden puppets,
like a marionette.
Yeah, marionette. Yeah. And so that's what it looked like, and it as well as from going back and forth to the human world to her telling the story, it flowed well. And then Coco, obviously by Pixar,
it
looked
was
a lot
very
like Toy Story.
based. Now, art-wise, the two films, they stand alone.
Yeah.
I don't want to really compare the two, because I mean, I really like Book of Life's art. I really like Coco's art. And when it comes down to the music, I prefer actually the covers on a lot of the stuff, just because that's what I normally listen to, are covers of music, whereas I don't remember anything for Coco, just because a lot of it was going back and forth between English and Spanish and stuff like that. On when it came to their use of the lore, or I guess not lore, but use of the Dias Los Muertos background and all that, they kind of took it two different ways, because Book of Life touches on the land of the remembered and the land of forgotten, and in the land of forgotten is where you fade away. Whereas in Coco, they just have this place. They don't show you the deities that rule over. It's just the land of the remembered. When you're not remembered anymore, bye.
Yeah, there's very much so a lack of I don't want to say order, but maybe at the same time I do want to say order. It's very self-governed, I guess, in their land of the dead.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? There's something about the story. Oh, I really liked how both films had this kind of follow your dreams feel, even though it's not maybe what your family did, what your father or mother did, and both were musicians, and so they were both kind of straying away from that my family wants me to be this, but I don't want to be this because I don't feel like that's where my heart is at.
Yeah.
And so storyline on both of them were very similar, but they worked in both stories. And so it was really good seeing that.
And you see, like in Book of Life goes over the course of several years, where it starts off with as children and they picks up whenever they're adults, and then Coco is just
one night.
That one night you get to see everything that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And both films are a great journey. The villain, I guess in a way, for the two films are very different, because you have like almost a act of nature, like man versus nature kind of feel in Book of Life, whereas in Coco you don't really know that there's a villain until halfway through the film.
Yeah. And then and I don't want to give away the end of Coco, but it's so good. But I do, and one thing we didn't get to really talk about was Miguel, finding his grandfather, as well as meeting his idol musically. And I don't believe Manolo had anything like that. He just wanted to play.
Yeah.
I think at some point it kind of related back to his father, reconciling with that, or reconciling with they had a very big metaphorical moment with like a bull, he had to defeat the bull, but he defeated it, but it wasn't in the way that, he was able to do it his way. And so it was really good storyline on both of them.
Well, that's going to be all the time that we have for today, guys. I'm Cody.
And I'm Shelby.
We'll see y'all next week.